really matters.
Hi, my name is Arnie Herz, and welcome to the podcast Habits of a Whole Heart as part of the Humanity Matters series on HMTV. And I'm very happy to have my friend, Rabbi Levi Paltiel, back with us for a second episode. First one was incredibly rich, and now we're going to dive a little more deeply into some of these issues. Thank you for tuning in. And Rabbi Levi Paltiel. Levi, thank you for joining me again and staying for podcast episode 2.
My pleasure. The first one was a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to the second one.
That's great. So you just ended episode number 1 with very, very profound statement about the essence of Judaism, in which you shared that real Judaism comes from within. That it's not about something that gets imposed from without with all these obligations and rituals, and it's really something that you awaken from within yourself. That's true Judaism. And when you connect with that, then you understand how the mitzvahs that we perform are really just an expression of our core self and not meant to be something that burdens us, but rather frees that essential self. Is that a fair way of stating it?
That's great. Actually, something that you taught me when you first discovered Judaism is you told me one of the things that really took you is, you've been into meditation, you've been into a lot of spiritual things, but you said what stood apart from Judaism or from Chassidic is how it taught you that spirituality and physicality don't actually stand apart. They work hand in hand. And I think that very much ties into this conversation, which is if it's about who I am. So I'm not putting anything on me. So there's no part of me that's going to stand in the way of that truth. There's no part of me, even my desire to eat or my desire to wear nice clothing or the part of me that's very much in this world. I don't have to throw that out to embrace Judaism. On the contrary, recognizing that that was given to me by the same God, that brings it all together. That brings the whole heart, because that brings the two parts of the package, realizing that it's really who you are. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? Does that connect to what you've told me back in the day?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm thinking about, like, you just take something, for example, that I started doing almost 20 years ago, which was putting on tefillin every day. And if you don't understand the deeper meaning of it and the deeper experience of it, it's just another obligation. It's a strange obligation. You have to take out tefillin, you have to put it on your arm, you have to put it on your head, and it's just yet one more thing we have to do in our very, very busy lives. But when I understood the deeper meaning of tefillin, that I have a godly soul within me, and that the tefillin, in a sense, is the extension cord that connects me from God into my daily life, that plugs in the fan that runs my life. When I put on these straps and imagine divine energy coming in through my head, infusing my body, coming in through my arm and giving me strength, and filled with tremendous symbolism. Now, when I put on tefillin, it becomes a meditation of bringing in light and energy and purpose into my day. And this now activates me and enhances me and frees me to fulfill the higher purpose that I was meant to fulfill. So that would be like one small example.
So I want to ask you, because you mentioned tefillin, which is something that you've been doing for 20 years. I recall when you first started keeping Shabbat, I don't know if this is, how long ago was this?
This was almost 7 years ago.
Almost 7 years ago. So when you first started keeping Shabbat, I asked you, what was that trigger? What was the switch? You've been studying a lot and you've been inspired, and I knew it's something that you wanted to do, but what was that thing that switched you? And you had a number of things that you told me, but one of them, you said was that my brother-in-law was telling you that you should not you should keep the light on in the bathroom. Instead of having to turn it on when you want to use the bathroom, you just keep it on. So maybe you could tell us about that, how that had an effect, such a little thing. What does that mean, and how did that have an effect on you?
So I think before I go to that question, I want to just take it further back. I'm 63 now. So I started doing Tefillin, I guess I was around 56, 57. Almost 57. So I spent the first, 56, 57 years, particularly my adult life, thinking how I could not possibly keep Shabbat and live life effectively. Too much is happening on a Saturday. Too much is going on. I've got kids, it's too much work, I cannot imagine my life if I kept Shabbat. Once I started keeping Shabbat, the whole thing turned. And I said, I cannot imagine how I lived for almost 57 years without keeping Shabbat. So I went from seeing it as something which was a burden to something that was totally freeing. And I think this goes back to the whole understanding of Tefillin. And now I see Shabbat as 25 hours of freedom from the phone, the news, from all this stuff that brings in so much stress and negativity and is necessary for us to engage with 6 days a week and absolutely necessary for us to disengage with 1 day a week. And when you do that, an essential aspect of myself frees up and allows me to be alive in a way that I never thought was possible. And this is the same experience that my wife has. And so for now, almost 7 years, we've had the benefit of the Shabbat, which has not only transformed our Shabbat, but it's also transformed the entire week, and it directs the week. So what were the triggers? There was a whole many number of triggers. First, we started, just keeping a partial Shabbat. We would just do a Friday night dinner with no phones, and then it was a Friday night dinner and no phones until Saturday morning. And then it was stretched out to, we're going to go to shul on Saturday. So we were staying off phones for, maybe 18 hours and stretched it out a little bit. But then there was this, Avremo, your brother-in-law, who's the Chabad rabbi in Newark, had made the suggestion of just don't do anything, just keep the bathroom light on is the only thing. And so I started doing that, and I remember I was inadvertently turning it on, I was turning it off, and then I came to the realization that this is ridiculous. Like, just keeping the light on, just for the bathroom makes no sense. I'm either going to do it or I'm not going to do it. And then, I tried it out, and we kept a real Shabbat, and it was transformative, and there was no turning back.
Unbelievable. What I want to point out, I don't know if you recognize this yourself, is when I hear that story, I actually think that as much as you discounted not turning on the light, but I actually think that it was that. Maybe it was the Jewish guilt. But more importantly, I think it was the act of not turning on the light, keeping Shabbat in relation to the light in the bathroom. That's what led you to the rest of it. And I think that's such an incredible message. People say, why should I do it if I can't do it all? They say, Rabbi, I'm not going to put on film because I don't eat kosher. Or Rabbi, I can't walk to shul because I use my phone. And I say, even if there's one little thing that you're going to do, you're going to say, I always keep a pen in my pocket. I'm not going to carry that pen to shul on Shabbat. Take it something small. You're connecting to positivity. You're plugging in to something which is holy, to something which is true within. And that's only going to blossom from there to bigger and better.
Well, that's what I love about the Chabad approach and the Rebbe's approach, is that it's always focusing on where can you connect. There's no such thing as a bad Jew in Chabad world. None. Each one of us, every Jew and every non-Jew, from the Rebbe's perspective, is a divine light, a precious life that God created for a specific purpose that's desperately needed in a role that nobody else can perform. the ultimate of purpose. And the focus is, what are you doing right? So and the Rebbe would say that someone who puts on tefillin once in their life may be holier than someone who puts it on every day. So I love that approach of just whatever little step you can do to connect is a connecting point. And that connecting point, however short and brief, is going to bring a lot of very, very positive energy in. Then what happens in a good way, as you connect and you start getting the positive, the dopamine of the godly connection, it starts becoming addictive. And it becomes addictive in a good way. So much so that I now keep Shabbat. I now put on tefillin every day because there's a positive reaction. And I think that's a lot of what Chabad and the Rebbe tries to bring out. Focus on the positive, because that's going to be really enticing. And surely that's what you do with your classes, with your writing, and with your teaching.
I appreciate that. One thing that comes to mind when you said about, when you started putting on tefillin and you started connecting to it and you realize what it's about and the deeper meaning behind it. And I think that many people don't have that experience necessarily. People don't know. They don't know the deeper meaning. They don't have that depth. And I still urge people to put on the tefillin. I have a line that I started saying recently, and I hope it doesn't come back to bite me, but I don't think it will, which is, I've never put on tefillin on somebody that had regret. I've put on tefillin on thousands of people, and not one has ever regretted laying that tefillin. People were hesitant beforehand, but after the fact, no one has ever had regret. And is that because every single person that I laid tefillin with had an understanding about it? Absolutely not. But in a way, tapping into something which is greater than understanding. Our brains know that there's more than our brains. Our brains know that we're not a brain at our essence. Our soul is deeper than a brain. And for us to have a soul experience, and not just an intellectual experience, at times that could even be greater. Recognizing that in reality, tefillin has a depth that our brain will never be able to understand. So there is the concept of engaging our brain in Judaism and recognizing why I put on tefillin, which is incredible because that takes the soul experience and allows me to really feel it inside, feel it in my emotions and relate to it as a regular person. But there is a depth there, which is the soul depth. And if I only allow myself to have the intellectual experience, I'll never allow myself to recognize something which is beyond the intellect, the reality of it, the truth of it. I think something about science, which is incredible, is that science believes that there's more than science, right? So I just heard someone talk about this, how there's a bumper sticker that says, believe in science, or trust science. And he's a scientist, and he was saying, science doesn't trust science. Science says don't trust, understand, see the statistics, test it. And the concept is that science believes that there is an underlying current to this humanity, which ties it together, because the fact that they could do a test one place and they believe that that's going to be true for the other place, it's because they see a unity in this world. They believe that in terms of time and space, things are connected. And recognizing that we're trying to come to discover that truth. And we're going to discover it with logic. We're going to discover it with statistics. We're going to discover it through testing. But all that testing is never going to be truer than the actual truth that lies behind it. And if I'm able to ever pause and tap into that truth, tap into that reality that lies in the undercurrent, that lies behind nature, allow myself to kind of lift my eyes beyond the wall of statistics and beyond the wall of what I see. Because the fact that I'm judging something means that there's something behind there. There's an art, there's a life, there's a truth. And to tap into that truth, which stands beyond logic, that's an experience that, is you can't interchange that with any logical, any class, any lesson.
Oh, you brought up something made a very profound statement, a number of profound statements, but it's that you talked about the soul. So when you think about our typical lives on a day-to-day basis, our lives are, and that's what I was saying in episode number 1, our God is our mind for most people. Does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And a lot of what makes sense and doesn't make sense is driven by our emotions. Is this pleasurable or is this painful? So we're living in this paradigm, for the most part, limited by our mental processing, driven by the limitations of our pleasures and pain. So we're stuck in this, and we think that this is all there is. And then by living life that way, we end up shortchanging ourselves tremendously. And that's the unhappiness, the dissatisfaction, the malaise, because it's limited. And so when you talk about soul, you're inferring that there is something beyond our mind and our emotions. And oftentimes, one of the things that I'll share with people is that, just like you were saying with the astronomy, with the stars, unless someone looks in a telescope, is not going to be able to accept that there's a reality of this. It's very difficult for people to accept that there's a reality outside their own mind and their emotions. First of all, people don't even realize that they're trapped in that. And second of all, it's very difficult for them to realize there's something beyond that. But we know from Einstein, which is a God that most people will accept because it's science, that time and space are just relative. It's a construct. We also know that what we hear and see is limited by the capacity of our ear and our eyes to pick up certain wavelengths and bandwidths. That if we had different set of eyes and a different set of ears, we would be able to take in so much more data and see a different reality. So we could see that it's limited. I could convince someone that it's limited. But the soul level of connecting to something beyond that is what I was really trying to get at about Shabbat and Tefillin, something that's transcendent. So anyway, that's, I said a lot.
I see this when I put Tefillin on people, in which I was talking about, no one ever told me that they regretted doing it. I'll meet people that are hesitant to do it, or they've never done it in their life. And perhaps they didn't grow up with Judaism, and perhaps they don't live as a Jew at all in any way, shape, or form on a daily basis. And then I'll put the straps on them, and I'll say the Shema with them, or sometimes I'll just do the Shema, and they'll burst out crying, and or they'll just tear up, and there's something that they're feeling, there's something that they're experiencing that I can't explain. It humbles me, because with my knowledge, sometimes it's hard to tap into that soul. But for someone that doesn't know what it's about, and they're just putting it on because some rabbi asked them to put it on, in reality, they could tell me more than I could tell them that I didn't ask them to do something for me. Rather, they tapped into something that they have themselves, which was what I was saying before, that concept that, people say, what's Chabad's hidden sauce? Why is Chabad so successful? And I think one of the reasons is because we never ask someone to do something which is out of themselves. We'll ask someone to go out of their comfort zone, but we're only asking them to step into themselves. And when I ask someone to put on tefillin, or when I ask someone to give tzedakah, or when I ask someone to, if they want to come to my service, essentially, I'm not offering them something which is mine, because I would feel uncomfortable doing that. What I'm saying is, this is something which is yours. It's yours as much as it's mine. And do you want to take it? And if you say no, it has nothing to do with me. Feel comfortable saying no. I'm comfortable getting a no because you didn't refuse something that's mine. You chose not to take something which is yours, and that's fine as well. But if you choose to take it, you'll feel fully comfortable because I didn't give it to you. It was yours all along.
Beautiful. So that's really, really beautiful. And this is some great thoughts as we approach the holidays, a time of us really, I think, the ability to wake up. It's an opportunity, whether we take that opportunity or not. As you said, it's a gift that's yours. The high holidays is a gift for us to recognize there's something more than our thoughts and our feelings, that there's a core essence of self, and that we're here for a purpose. And there's a chance to connect with that in a very deeply meaningful way. So I know in Chabad, Chassidus, we've talked a lot about, we've studied together. What is this soul? And you talk about what's your soul. I know that there's what we call the human soul, or sometimes known as the animal soul, and then we have this thing called the godly soul, and we have these two souls within are one system here, and there's a battle between the animal soul and the godly soul. So just shed some light on what are these different souls and how do they relate to each other and which one's the real deal?
Okay, that's a great question. We obviously have two parts to ourselves. I think everyone recognizes that. The part of ourselves that are more into accomplishing, into being there for others, into being needed, into having a mission and a purpose. A part of ourselves that are more divinely connected or spiritually connected. And then there's the part of ourselves that's selfish, the survival instinct, the part of ourselves that wants to eat and sleep and do physical things and enjoy. And when you have a God, you realize that these two parts are not separate. Rather, they're actually one and the same, because if God's mission in this world for me is to elevate the world, to bring godliness into the world, I have to have those two parts. I have to have a godly soul, but then I have to have an animal soul, which is going to ground that godly soul. And as long as I know about those two souls and how they're going to interact, I'll be able to maneuver them properly. One great parable that I'll never forget, I was 14 years old, and my teacher shared this with us. He was talking about the animal soul and the godly soul. And he said, anything that you want to do now, but you're going to regret later, that's the animal soul. Anything that you don't want to do right now, but in the future you're going to love that you did it, that's the godly soul. And he gave us this parable. He said, you have this person that's walking a horse, and he comes to a fork in the road. And on the right side, you have this muddy path. But give it 5 feet, give it 10 feet, it becomes all clear and beautiful, and it's an incredible walk. And then you have on the left side this path that's very clear and nice to walk on, but it only lasts about 5 or 10 feet. And after that, it just becomes muddy. So you have the horse, and then you have the person. And the horse is looking down, and right away they veer off to the left side. But the human being who's on top recognizes that would be a bad idea. He wants to go to the right. And recognizing that that's the good for the horse as well. The horse is going to be happier going to the right, because it might not be so exciting at the beginning, but ultimately it will be that much more, enjoyable, or I don't know if that's a word, but pleasurable. Then they will have that strength. And it's all about whether we have that strength or not. What could I hold on to those reins long enough to schlep it back to the right side, recognizing that if God gave me this challenge, then I could do it.
Beautiful. I love that metaphor. And I think when you say, so to the strength that we need from a spiritual perspective and a worldly perspective is not the ability to conquer things outside of ourselves, but it's to conquer our own nature, to take this animal soul with its desires and short-term thinking, and to use our intelligence to look ahead to see what's in our best interests and direct ourselves to that. And that one who can control their impulses and act in their own best long-term interests is going to be much more successful on every possible level. And this is the real endeavor. It's not about being obedient to God. It's the essence of Judaism is this struggle that benefits our true godly self, the soul that God gave us. And if it was so easy and we didn't have the temptation to follow the short-term thinking, there wouldn't be any struggle. And it's the struggle of overcoming this is really the challenge and the opportunity and the gift of life.
So I was talking to my grandfather, Rabbi Zalman Schmuckler from LA, and he shared with me how he was a young boy in yeshiva, in school, and they went on some sort of trip to Manhattan, and they were all given a horse. And they were walking around with this horse, and there was some sort of pond in the middle of the lake, and they gave him this really big, burly horse, and the horse decided that it wanted to take a swim in the lake, or at least that's what my grandfather understood. And it started going to the lake, and my grandfather was this little boy, and he's freaking out because I don't know if he knew how to swim, but he was not going to go into that lake. And he's trying to schlep the horse, and the horse is going, and it became this fight between him and the horse. And eventually he was able to pull it away from the lake. And he's, there was a few things that he said he took out of that story. He's like, why did God do that to me? And he said, number one, sometimes we have a struggle and we don't know how we're going to get past it. And the answer is, if you have that struggle, that means that you have the ability to get past it. But you have to recognize that it's your life. You have to recognize that it's about happiness or not happiness, or life or death. It's about living with life, living with meaning, living with purpose that's going to allow me to schlep that horse away from where it's not supposed to go. And number two, he said, there were other kids that were much more scrawny than him. And he said, if they got that horse, they would not be able to do it. So he says, God gives everyone the horse that they could handle. That's a beautiful concept. And so this is bringing us to a close. I can't believe that the second episode is over already. And it's very, very meaningful. And I would love to have you back at some point in the future and further expand on these as we get to other holidays and talk about this. But the concepts that you really brought out about the horse and the fact that God doesn't give us a struggle that we're not capable of handling, that we have a purpose and a meaning, and we're here for a purpose and a meaning, and that we have within us Judaism. It's within us, meant to free us and to liberate us and to use these coming weeks as a springboard to a more meaningful life. Thank you for sharing all your tremendous wisdom and your friendship. And thank you for having me.
And yeah, of course, loved it. And I want to just wish everyone who's Jewish, Hoshana Tova, Happy New Year, and use this time wisely to create a life of wholeness and meaning and purpose, to be the CEO, as Rabbi Levi Paltiel said, of your own life, and to create the beauty that you are meant to create. So thank you very much. And this brings to close this episode of Habits of a Whole Heart on HMTV. Please tune in to this episode and all the episodes on hmtv.com. You can also find this on YouTube, Apple, and all the podcast outlets. Thank you very much. Have a great day.